Welcome to today's episode of CLCI Live, brought to you by the award-winning and ICF accredited school, Certified Life Coach Institute. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome in.
Oh, we got a lot of us here today, don't we?
I know, we got a big group. It's exciting.
Decided we were Hollywood Squares.
Yes, absolutely. Circle gets a square. I just like tic-tac-toe, really is what it is.
Tic-tac-toe? Okay.
Before we go down the ICF credentialing rabbit hole, exam rabbit hole, which is what we'll be discussing today. Sorry to ruin the surprise for everybody. But we are going to be, or I want to, if you have questions, I see Misha. Hi, Misha. Or you want to join in the conversation, please do so. Leave comments and questions in our chat here. We want to hear from you. And beyond that, also, that's it from now. Join the conversation. That's all for me. Now it's all you guys. I'm done.
What the heck are we talking about today? You said ICF accreditation exam. Why would I need to take an exam for the ICF? What is that for? What does that
First
get
of all, it's not an accreditation exam, right? It's a credentialing exam. Let's not confuse our coaches.
I have to be very particular with our words here.
Yeah.
Well, it's a process, right? We have amazing guests that are with us. We have Brandy and Monsalit, Beverly, all here on the top of the screen. Hello. I was looking elsewhere, and you guys all ended up there at the top. I was like, you have all had the actual experience of taking the exam, and so they are here, and this is a big part of this to share what that was like with us.
Let's just give briefly that detail. What they did is they took their training. They got at least 60 hours with us. They got a little more, right? They've got their 100 hours where they were out coaching people and bringing it in and making some money, and maybe giving it out for free. At least 25 hours is what you can do. So out of that 125, it can be, can I speak? Pro bono. And then the other part is we have our internal mentoring process. They were with Dan, and they went through the mentor process with Dan for their 10 hours. And they found the best coaching session evaluated to submit to ICF. All things passed, looked groovy, and then they got invited to take the test.
I think that's what they actually say to you before you take the test. They go, "It looks groovy. You can take the exam. You can take the test now."
Well, Hollywood Squares. We're talking the Brady Bunch. We're talking. So got to stick with that era, right? Okay.
Okay. And then we go in and we take a big and scary exam, right? I mean, that's it. Were you guys nervous? Were you nervous before taking it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I was.
Yes. Yeah.
Was that nervousness warranted after taking the test?
No.
No. I think because I felt prepared.
What it allowed you to feel prepared?
I mean, honestly, I took the approach, because I've done several different credentialing exams, that less was more. And I was going to be very focused for the 5 to 7 days leading up to it versus trying to stress about it for weeks and weeks on end. And so I really spent most of my time breaking it up each day, watching the videos on YouTube for the ICF core competencies, like 2 or 3 per day. And I reviewed the ethics off the website. And at the end of the day, I sort of trusted my gut. At that point, when you take the exam, you really do have a lot more experience than you're thinking you do when you're first starting out. And all the questions are really, based on that experience and knowing what the study material was, but also what your coaching experience tells you. So it was actually a little less scary than I thought, because I had really just focused and not tried to overwhelm myself.
I applaud your ability to do that.
Yeah. can pretend that I'm doing that, but I'm really not doing that. Dan was describing his experience. He decided to jump out of a perfectly good airplane for his birthday, and he described how, he thought he was okay, and how his foot was going a little cuckoo-nuts, which indicates that, and that's what I would do. I would have little signs of nervousness that I would think I'm okay, but really not. Beverly, how was yours?
Well, I was the exact opposite from Brandy. I overstudied. I looked at videos on YouTube, which were a wonderful source of information, but at the time I didn't know. So what I did was, oh, let me just see what's on the exam. So I took the exam purposely just to see what was on there, and I failed. But I was okay with that because that's not what I wanted, but I kind of figured that would happen because I was reading all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
And that just became overwhelming. So after I took the exam, I thought, oh, I see the focus is on ethics. There's a heavy concentration of information regarding corporate corporate coaching. So then that helped me kind of organize my study. And what really didn't matter on the exam, I just, I knew the information, but I knew I didn't need it for the exam. So the second time I took it, that's when they implemented the break. And I just breezed through it. I didn't break. And I was just clicking away. It was, it was okay because I had more of an idea of what to study. And I was overstudying. And that's what made me nervous. It was overwhelming. The information there's a lot. There's a
So
lot.
there is a break, but they didn't make you take a break. Is that correct?
The first time I took it, it was the old exam, and the second time I took it, there's a break, but you can say pass.
Gotcha.
Pass the break. So I said pass the break. I just want to get this puppy to bed. I want to do this. So I kept going, and it's an option. It doesn't stop or anything. It's just an option, and if you want to continue, just say you want to continue, and that's it.
So I do have another question. Oh, I know. Sorry.
I'm curious, Brandy, did you take the exam in person or virtually?
Oh, I had to go in person. I cannot take exams virtual. It was better for me that way.
Okay. And then, so we'll ask more about that in a moment. Beverly?
I was here.
You did virtual. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then Monthly, do you want to share your experience?
Yeah, sure. So I was a little bit like Brandy. I mean, I scheduled my test about 3 weeks out, and then I was studying and listening to videos, but I really buckled down maybe 5 days before. And I took it virtually, my test, and I've never done a test virtually. So as some of you know, I'm a little bit tech shy. So I was a little nervous. Actually, I tried to start the test and I had a couple of things running on my computer that I had to delete so I could come back and take the exam. And yeah, I think for me, it was studying. I mean, the core competencies is really huge. There's a lot of corporate structure type questions. So if you're not doing any corporate coaching, I would say you really need to study that. And then just knowing your verbs, like that sort of, if I wasn't sure, I was looking at the verbs of, are they saying invite? Are they saying advise? Is this client directed versus client coached? Because the questions that they have online are not, this seems very easy compared to, I think, the questions they actually have in the test. I don't know if Brandy and Beverly feel the same, but I felt that they were nothing like the questions on the test. So.
We have those questions here, so we can kind of talk about them and talk them through as well. Before we do it quickly, I think that really, and you did the virtual, and then before we get into the meat and potatoes of the exam itself, how was that with the proctor? How was that experience? I think it was important to note that Monsley said that she had to make sure her computer was clear. I could imagine little things like that really stressing somebody out. So that's really a great nugget of information to have. How was like that structure, that proctoring experience?
Well, for me, I didn't know what to expect. I thought I would see the proctor. You don't see a proctor, but you're being recorded. And then I had heard that if the proctor sees you looking up a lot or looking to the side, they'll stop you in the exam. I had heard that. So I just tried to stay very focused on my screen. They also make you take photos of your whole area that you do on your phone. You know, like I had Dropbox downloaded on my computer to access my files, and I couldn't take my exam without removing Dropbox. I removed it a few days before the exam, and then when I went to the day of to take the exam, you run a test and it showed up again. So that was a little stressful. Like I was able to troubleshoot that. But yeah, I would say if you're not tech savvy, you want to get those things set up beforehand, I would say. I don't know, you know, obviously Beverly's experience, but that was mine.
Do they give you a list of programs that you cannot have on your computer? No.
No, it runs the test. If anything's close it.
Okay, and can you access that test prior to taking it so you know? I'm curious. Do they send you that, or is it just in the moment? Oh,
No.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, you can test it before the test. Like you can go through like it's called like peer view. Is that right? I think it was called peer view, and you can go through the testing. But I closed my Dropbox, and then it still kept coming up. So there were certain things I literally had to remove off my computer so that I could take it.
wow.
So you do have like you can test it beforehand, but I would just again do it the day of. You're able to log on 30 minutes before your exam.
Thank you. Like stuff I'm very curious about, the actual structural process of it. Brandy, how about the in-person experience?
So thankfully, I had actually done in person a year or two ago at the same exact test center for my SPHR. So I was familiar with what that felt like. And I was really grateful for that, because if you haven't actually gone to a formal test center, it has its own sort of formal, strict characteristics about it. But I didn't want to have to fumble through tech, because I myself have those same issues, I feel like, all the time. But going to the test center, you know, you definitely have to read all the rules and make sure you comply with every single one of them. So, you know, the 2 forms of ID, you have to put your things in a locker. You have to basically don't say a word unless someone speaks to you. They do a tissue before, in case you have to wipe your nose. Like, it's very regimented. But you're there for one purpose. You go in, you can put on headphones to be with, you know, total silence, and you just sit there and stare at the exam until you're done. And for me, I needed that focus because I cannot be in my environment or there's just a million other thoughts in my head. So it worked for me, and I got myself a prize on the ride home through Starbucks, but I just needed to just go do it and be done.
Very fair, very fair. Do we have any other questions, guys, in like the technical space before we get into the exam itself?
Some technical information I just brought up right now, like for the actual CKA on Pearson VUE as well.
Credentialing exam.
It's
no longer the CKA. It's
an exam.
That's what it says on the Pearson VUE for the ICF. It's still listed
funny.
as the CKA.
Well,
but you need, you know, up-to-date browsers. You must have your cookies enabled, and pop-up blockers must be disabled. Obviously, you need a good internet connection.
I guess you need pop-ups for that. Okay.
And they have all the testing policies on there as well. Never mind, there's an unexpected problem. Never mind, you can't look at it.
Anything else? Then we can talk about the meat and potatoes of this really quick.
So everybody's been talking major in the background as I'm on different chats about this silly break. The silly break. Brandy, did you take one?
I did not. I just wanted to get through the test and focus. Yeah.
Yeah. Did any of you, did Monsalib, did you take a break?
I did, yeah. I took maybe 3 minutes, went to the bathroom, and then came back.
Oh, and they let you go to the bathroom? Because we've heard that wasn't allowed either.
Like, well, what's the point of the break then?
That's kind of the weird thing, is that they weren't allowing anyone to go away from their computer. They weren't allowing you to get up from, if you're in the test center.
I think that was before they implemented the break. My understanding was, so you have a choice. Like it'll come up when you're done with the first hour and a half. If you finish your first half of the test, it'll say now you can take a 5-minute break, and you can either press yes, and then it starts counting the clock, and you can go and come back, and you can go and come back at any point, and then start the second half of your test and finish it. And something else, at least in the virtual test, is, which was really helpful for me, and I knew this before I went in, you can flag your questions. So basically, right, you have, I think it's 81 questions. You only have about a minute and a half, right, to answer each question with 2 answers. So you can flag your questions and then come back at the end of your time, go back to those flagged questions, and then make your answers. So that was something I did just for questions that was going to take me more than a couple of minutes to answer.
So on that first half, I think is like 41 or 81 questions if we do the times 2. Are you able, after the break and after you complete the next 40 questions or 80 questions, to go back to the beginning part of the questions?
No, you get your first 40 questions, and then you can go back to those flagged. Then as soon as you hit that break or move to the next section, you're not allowed to go back to the first.
Okay.
Okay. And so in that space, now we can talk a little bit about what ICF has told us, and then you guys can see it to let us know if this feels like what you experienced, right, in the exam. So what they had outlined was that it's 13 foundation, 13% of the quizzes demonstrates ethical practice, 12% embodies a coaching mindset. In co-creating a relationship, where it's breaking it down so almost equally. This is how it breaks it down. Facilitating client growth, listening actively. So it feels like a very fair sort of dispersing of these tools. Did you guys feel like this was the case, or that it was weighted more in one area or another in your experience of the exam?
For me, it was hard to tell the category. You're kind of just answering the questions based on knowledge. So that's why I guess it's really important to know the ethical section regarding ICF and ethics, because it seemed like most of the answers were about ethics. For me, it just seemed like it was heavily weighted toward ethics and corporate coaching, just situations around that. So for me, I wasn't thinking of, oh, what category am I in? Am I at the co-creating the relationship, or am I kind of going through? And that's why it's important to really know the information, because you really don't have time to figure out, where am I with this? Am I at the first 13% where they're asking? It's hard. It's kind of, you're just answering questions. For me, that was my experience. It's hard to tell where you are. In terms of, am I finished with the 13% of the co-creating relationship?
Yeah.
It wasn't like that for me.
Well, and there's probably no time to do that. But, there's one thing that I think we really forgot to do at the beginning of all of this process is to congratulate you all 3. You are now credentialed coaches.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
We just want to know about this test. That's all. This is Congratulations.
Because we have not had the chance to take it yet, which is just driving us crazy.
It'll be myself, Jen, and Jerome here who are the next ones to take that.
Or Dan and I.
Dan and Lisa.
Or the
me,
ACC.
if I get my PCC, they have to take it.
We have to take it at MCC.
I see.
I have a question for Beverly, since you got to take it twice. And I'm still processing the question in my head as I ask it, but when you went back to take it, were the same questions in the same order, or did it feel like they randomized it a bit so that you couldn't just like pop in and know the answers?
It felt like it was the exact same exam.
Okay.
It didn't feel
Interesting.
another one because they knew I took that one. Sometimes, and I've taken a lot of tests in my life, so sometimes you just get a brand new exam. They gave me the only difference was there was a 5-minute break offered. But everything
Okay.
felt good.
And the order?
You had taken your
felt
first one before the 1st of February when they implemented the 5
right.
minute. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
I've heard that they will randomly change it, but
there. Not for me. Maybe I got lucky. It was the same exam.
Yeah. Or maybe they're not those. Yeah.
I will
Yeah.
say, just as far as the questions, I do feel like the balance was what we saw on the slide. But to Beverly's point, you don't really know. You're just answering the scenarios. They're all scenarios. For me, it felt like there were probably more ethics type questions than there were. But that's only because I actually got a good score. And I really think the ones I missed were all the ethics ones, which is weird because I'm actually a corporate coach and I do a lot around ethics, but the way they were worded, it was one where I just kept going into my head. And I wasn't doing that for most of the others, but the ethics ones made me keep going back in my head to try to remember what did I read about ethics specifically on the ICF website. So it was a little bit more of an academic exercise, but also I feel like I probably honed in on the wrong word or the wrong nuance of the scenario that they were providing. And it was specifically around the ethics ones. I felt those were the ones I flagged the most to go back to just to see if I was second guessing myself.
And I know this is probably asking a lot, but is there any question specifically that you have a memory of that you'd like to share? And that one that tripped you up?
Yeah, verbatim.
You know what? No, but however, I will say there were those sample questions on the ICF website. I think it was, in fact, I printed them out. So there is one in there that when I was re-reviewing it just ahead of this session, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. That was one of the ethics ones where for some reason I just had to think like, okay, the answers are so close. Like, what is the best the best choice versus what is the appropriate ethical choice. And some of them are both good answers. So those are the ones that I found that I tripped myself up on.
Do you know which of the example questions? Because I have them here.
Let me
tell me how it starts. Tell me the beginning of that.
Yeah.
Like
the ethics ones are pretty clear. Let me open up the printout here. They're pretty obvious.
Just put it up on the screen, Brooke.
Okay, I can do that.
It's like there's a conflict of interest one in here.
Number one. Number one is core comp one.
Conflict of okay, perfect. Okay, so let me get there.
Thanks,
Dan.
And I definitely don't remember.
Has these memorized verbatim because Dan
almost every week he repeats them.
Yes. So we have it here. A coach is meeting with a prospective client who is growing a new business. The coach and potential client quickly establish an easy connection. The coach is excited about the opportunity to work with the client. As the coach and client are ending their conversation, the prospective client briefly mentions the name of their new business. The coach recognizes the business as the coach is an investor in a more established competitor business in the same community. So that's our situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now we want to figure out what is the best thing to do and what is the worst. So this is how the exam works for those of you out there. So we're just looking for the best the first time around. Not say anything. Try to keep their role as an investor in a competing business separate from their role as a coach. B, share the business name sounds familiar and make a mental note to determine whether it is a competitor business later that evening. 3, share their role as the investor in the competitor business only if the potential client follows up to pursue coaching with the coach. Or D, share their role as an investor in a competing business and acknowledge the possibility of a conflict of interest with the client. I know what I would answer.
Yeah, I know what I would answer. It's not probably ethical, but
so in the best situation, D, right, is the best there, for me at least. Yeah. So let's briefly though, before we move on, rule out why the others would not be the best.
Well, should we do the worst first and then rule on them, or?
I think we can. Then we'll go to the worst after this. Or do you want to do the worst? What do the
worst, and then we can bookend it.
Yeah, I think
perfect.
Yeah, because we're going to be.
So then, what's the worst thing for us to do?
Not say anything.
Yes, not say anything. I would agree.
It seems like C would also be pretty bad because you're like sharing this after the fact that the client has made a commitment or a decision.
So yeah, there's some weird. This is where the nuances come in, right? When you start to read it and how you can get into your head. I think in these situations, right?
Yeah, it wasn't the best necessarily that was tripping me up. It would be the worst, because then it was like, well, they're all real
Worse.
life, like which is worse than the other. So that was exactly the problem I ran into on these.
Kind of
Yeah.
what we see in a pattern in this one is the keyword in the scenario is prospective client. It's somebody who hasn't signed up for coaching yet. They're considering it. So with the coach being an investor in a competing business, answer D, full transparency up front. I'm an investor in a competing business, because that might influence the client's decision to work with you, where B and C are withholding that information either to later in the evening, or if they come to sign up and now they're like, oh, thanks. If I would have known that, I would have gone to somebody else. Now I'm really bummed out. And then A is the worst answer, because where D is full transparency, A is complete opacity.
Is it dangerous to those of you who have taken the exam, when we look at those things where we have this, when Dan breaks it down like that and we hear, okay, here's full transparency, here's full opacity, it makes it a little more clear. Is it dangerous to assume, though, that there will be a scaling like that in the responses, to look for hints kind of in that way? Well, if this is the most extreme, this is the most transparent, this is the most opaque, opaque, I guess that works, right? Are you always going to have a scaling that is that clear when you take these, or did you find there was more nuance?
I think it's more nuanced than what you're seeing here, a lot more nuanced. And a lot of times the wrong answers has the word the coach asks, and it still was wrong. So as much as I think it's good to lean on the verbs, for me, there was a lot of nuances that it was still hard to see which ones were the worst. And it's much more nuanced than what these sample questions are to me. I'm curious to know what Brandy and Beverly think, but.
So go ahead, Beverly.
No, go ahead.
So I do think there was a scaling. Like I definitely think there was, like, I did look for some of those testing, kind of hints, like, okay, if it's like 100% this is it, then that's probably wrong. Like, you don't want anything that's an absolute, I guess is the best way to put it. So there were certain things that did help me along. But for the ethical one specifically, because there is really right and wrong involved, it was hard. I always flagged those to go back to, because there was always this one slightly less worst answer that was making it difficult in the nuance. So to her point, there is nuance in all of them, but most of the nuance resides in the middle. But it's not always easy to pick out the top and the bottom, the best and the worst. And that's where, you could, once you find yourself going over perhaps like a minute and a half thinking through that in your brain, that's where you just flag it and move forward, because you're going to end up on the hamster wheel, like second guessing yourself too long and wasting time. That was my approach with that.
Would it be, I guess, good for the example question that we did, putting yourselves in the seat of the client? Because if the potential client was looking at this question, it might seem obvious. Well, this is obviously what I would like to know, as I'm making my decision. And maybe the best and worst is, I guess the best and worst answer is more clear if you put yourself in the client seat. Would that line of thinking help in the actual exam?
I remember a couple of the questions because they just stood out for me. One of them was a sponsor sent an employee for coaching, and while the employee was being coached, he mentioned his supervisor being a bully, and the coach started getting phone calls from the supervisor demanding to know what was going on in the sessions. So the question was, do you email the contract to the supervisor, talk to the supervisor directly, tell your client to tell your supervisor no, or give the supervisor a telephone call? And I was like, email the contract, because it seemed like when anything had to do with contract, I always went with that. because they said, whatever's in your contract, that drives the train in terms of what you should do or what you should. So I figure email it to my answer was email the contract to the supervisor and let's read it, I guess. But the answers were so kind of, some of them just weren't to pick from. So, or some of them were all pretty good and one was obviously not it. And then you're left with three of, oh, I don't know, which one should I go with?
I see Monsley and Brandy nodding their heads. Do you guys have anything to add there?
That's a perfect example, and I remember that one too. That's a perfect example of that gray area I was talking about, where you end up on the hamster wheel, like thinking through what would you do in real life versus what did the ICF tell you you're supposed to do versus what might the client expect you or want you to do. Those are three very different things in some of these scenarios. So that's where it gets a little tricky.
I think Beverly's point is fantastic then in that situation, is the return to the contract. When you've got that, I mean, I think that's a good tool, but maybe that's just because I like contract.
Also to Beverly's point, for me, I think for them as well, like the second half of the exam, there's a lot of sponsored questions.
Yeah.
I mean, towards the end, I was like, oh my gosh, I think I may fail because there was just so many of them. And I didn't know I knew the right answer because you can sort of figure out through, is this transparent? Is this, right? Is this all these things? But then the worst answers were just really hard to choose. Really hard. And I don't know, there was a lot for me on the sponsorship and the ethical stuff on the test.
So thinking about the exam, and you're talking about the sponsors, is there a way to just, instead of making it about a company, the sponsor kind of thing, could you say the client versus the coach in this, or would that not work in the clearly identifying what a wrong answer would be?
It's the third party aspect of it that makes it tricky.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I'm flipping through the sample questions. I don't even think they give you a third party example in the sample questions. Which
and there's a lot of
thanks for that.
Yeah.
ICF. I think. I
won't go like. Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I almost wonder too if it's it's always that weird thing where I almost start to feel like it's team coaching. And I wish it's almost covering that portion of it for folks is helpful. But big note, we need to definitely talk more into the sponsee situation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Do you want to go?
There are a lot of questions around. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, perfect. Go. Yeah.
Around being an internal coach. Of course, they're sponsored, but just internally, what you can and cannot do, because you're sort of an employee and a coach. So there's a lot of that, and it's kind of, for me, it felt very like, ooh. I mean,
so when you're talking
about, I'm sorry.
For those of us not, more maybe newer to coaching, what would be the difference between internal and external coach? Just to sort of clear those terms.
W2 and W9.
So internal coach, you are an employee at the company and you're coaching other coworkers or maybe people who work under you. Whereas if you're external coach, you're brought in as maybe a third party to coach the people at a company or organizazation.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I would imagine questions around that. Can you think of any examples, or anything that, even if it's a generalized?
There was one where, and I think Dan and I spoke about this when I failed. I was like, how? So the question went somewhere along the lines of the internal coach. Well, the internal coach received this employee to coach, but they told the coach not to tell the employee that the employee is going to get fired. And I thought, oh. So the options in terms of an answer, I can't remember what they were. I think I immediately was talking about it with Dan, and I forgot what they were, but none of them seemed like they were good ideas. I mean, for me, it felt like you know, it was that one was a difficult one. That one was a difficult one.
And the employee was definitely going to be fired, like no matter what.
It was something along the lines of if they didn't come up to par, that's
if they didn't come up, okay, to snuff, then they
that
would be fired.
And should they tell them or not tell them, or what should, as a coach, what should you do, or what would you do was the question. And then there were the 4 options, and I remember all 4 options feeling like
Icky.
not a good scenario for anyone, really. I mean, you're
Mhm.
them out, or you're going to get fired, or I mean, for me, I don't remember what it was. It wasn't anything that felt like it was going to be a good situation. The other one was something about 2 coaches. Somebody had a business. I don't know if Brandy and Consolette, if you want to talk about that one. It was about the 2 companies had, and then one employee worked at a friend's company, and she asked her to coach her friend. And the friend came in and told the coach she wanted to start her own business, doing the same thing her friend was doing, by the way. And it says something along the lines of, as a coach, what would you do? So it was that kind of thing where you're put in a tough situation. And
So one, I mean, I know what ICF has told us is that they got these questions by polling coaches and getting real life situations that they had been put in. And then for the answers, what they did is they asked, again, they had a group of coaches and they said, okay, what would you do in this situation? What could you do in this situation? And then they gave all of those answers. You know, I think they gave like 8 or 9 of them to, as, okay, so if this is a question, what would you guys rate as the best and the worst? And they ended up, and they had them scale it. And they threw out the really easy one, and they threw out the really obviously bad ones. And then they kept the ones that were more nuanced and in the middle that could be a little more confusing. And so that was a very deliberate choice to get. But I think, I mean, I guess to be fair, things aren't always clear and black and white when we're put in these situations. So as annoying as it may be, maybe there was some thought there. So do you guys want to look at maybe another question and see, tell me, I mean, let us know what you guys think of, if it feels accurate or close to the test. I randomly picked this one. I don't know where I am. I keep flipping through them. So a client struggles with delegating tasks at work to their other team members. During the last session, the client shared that an important project that they are leading is falling behind schedule. The coach supported the client in identifying strategies to delegate tasks to their two other team members. At the next session, the client reports back and shares, in the end, I decided to complete all the tasks myself. That was the only way I was going to get them done. The coach feels disappointment that the client did not follow through on their plans to delegate. So we have a micromanager. Let's go through here. So what is the best and the worst? Immediately reflect back on their last session with the client and identify what they could have done differently to support the client in following through on their plans. B, take a breath and acknowledge the client is responsible for their own choice of whether to follow through with their stated plans or not. 3, set aside their disappointment for now and focus on the current session with the client. Decide to reflect on this situation during an upcoming session with their mentor coach, or praise the client for meeting the project deadlines, but ask why the client failed to support their team members' development. A little more nuanced, I think this one might be a little bit more.
So I will
This one's
say,
on core comp number 2, embodying a coaching mindset.
yeah, this one for me, I remember this is very similar to one of the test questions. If not, it is a test question. Very similar. But this is a great example, though, where if they're all too nuanced and you're struggling and spending too much time, the trick for me was take a breath and acknowledge. That right there was like, if you saw that, then that's probably your best answer, because that was actually a consistent theme. Like there were certain key phrases you would see repeatedly in the best answers. And this is a great example that has that in there. So it does help you to get off the hamster wheel pretty fast when you say, okay, this one actually includes take a breath and acknowledge versus trying to get caught up in all the details of the 4 answers.
So also take a breath and acknowledge in the exam as well.
I like how it implies that you're not breathing in A, C, and D.
You're disappointed and now you're holding your breath. Disappointed and now you're holding your breath. And so what would be the worst thing for us to do?
A.
D immediately strikes out as like praise the client.
Right.
That's the
Yeah.
first thing that I'm like,
Yeah, real nuance. I'm thinking A because they are prescribing in that answer. It's a bit of advice there.
Immediately reflect on their last session and identify what they could have done differently to support the client in following through on their plans.
Identifying
A does seem pretty bad too.
It does feel a little
they
like a
both
guilt trip,
seem-
right? It feels a little guilty. I feel a little like you're giving your client a guilt trip there. And then D, praise the client, which that's a big flag right there, right? As soon as we hear praise the client,
And asking the why as well.
Well, and why did you fail?
and why did you? Yeah. So
Why do you suck?
you start to read it, it starts to feel ickier and ickier, right? So
That's the judgment and bias probably sitting in there, right?
yeah.
Yeah, it's a big high five for doing what you said you weren't going to do.
Good job. Hi.
Good job, you.
But you can see how it could start to get confusing, right? I can absolutely see how these could start to get. This one's short. The other two are like really verbose. A client comes to a session appearing very stressed. When the coach asks what the client wants to talk about, the client frantically lists a major event they are planning at work, a large family gathering they are organizing, and caring for their aging parents. The client seems overwhelmed. The coach notices tears in the client's eyes. So best and worst. Ask the client if they need to take a moment before starting the coaching session since they seem upset. Ask the client to share more about their aging parents. Acknowledge that the client has shared 3 significant challenges that they are facing and ask the client which one they would like to explore first. Ask the client to begin with the major event they are planning at work since they mentioned it first. The good ones are for me more obvious. And then the bad ones, it's like, it does start to wrestle. You start to go, wait, what's the worst?
So did you guys find that the easy one? I mean, the right answer stood out, and then the wrong answer. There's so many nuances. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes, 100%. And this is another good one, by the way, for the clues. Although we didn't highlight the best answer yet, so I won't give it away.
So here's my question, Lisa and Dan. Does this change for PCC and MCC? Like, would A ever be
it's
a
the
better
same
answer?
test.
It's same test for all 3 levels.
Same test.
For all 3,
So,
yeah. And I think the hint is the word acknowledge, right? Is that the word? That's our hint right there. That's the right answer.
Not in this one though. There's something else to. Okay, you highlighted the answer. Yeah. So the other part that the other hint, and this goes both ways, good and bad, but is thinking about the emotion in here too, because some of them you want to deal with the emotion first. And so in this case, acknowledge trumped the emotion part of it, but because you're offering them the option to determine where they go in the session, but you want to focus on the emotion as well. And there is that theme that runs throughout some of the questions, but again, it's easier to identify them in the best answers than the worst answers.
Yeah, because I can see the word, like I could have quickly said bad, because for me, I see ask the client if they need to take a moment. Eek, hands off, don't want to do that, right? That's asking somebody to take their sunglasses off, right? Ask the client to share more about their aging parents. Well, now we're picking our topic. And then ask the client to begin with the major event since it's what they mentioned first, which is so arbitrary, right? Like it's so arbitrary. So it was really easy for me to just go, no, it's C. But again, a more nuanced in the worst. So what is the worst?
I wonder what the benefit of them telling us, if we know what the best answer is, I wonder what the benefit of us knowing
the worst
answer.
I think it's probably being able to parse the subtle differences, and if there's something that's obviously the worst, there's no benefit, because I can think of 100 things that are worse than these three. But if it's subtle, though, it means that the coach is taking time to think and consider the different options, and if they're able to come to the right conclusion, as dictated by the ICF, that means they're doing the work.
And I think we were able to prioritize sort of what the best actions are, right? And to know, like, to be able to sort of scale that, like, this is the best thing I could do, but we know all of these other little things, like just being able to say this is bad, and this is bad. Okay, so now what is the worst of all of those? And what is gonna make my skin crawl the most? I don't know. What is the worst? What is the worst?
Is the worst A?
No.
See, this is what confuses me, because I don't see a difference between B and D. To me, B and D are exactly the same.
They're not. Here's the nuance. So the client walks in. This one's around This one's around setting the session contract. The client comes in. The coach says, "What do you want to focus on?" They give the coach 3 items. So we can't focus on 3 items. Which one do you want to focus on first? Is C. The best thing to do is what do we narrow it down to? The difference between B and D, while they both involve the coach picking one of those 3 as the choice of avenue, D adds a layer of assumption that they must want to talk about this one since they mentioned it first. There's a layer of assumption that's leading to the choice rather than just randomly picking the 3.
Yeah, so D is worse also because it's not only assumption, it's a decision. We're deciding. Like we're in B, we're just asking. We're being, tell me more about but it's not that this is what we're working on. Whereas D is like, no, I just decided we're working on this. I want to do this.
Yeah. And then what Brandy was mentioning as far as addressing the emotion in the room, that whole assumption, there's an assumption in A that they need a minute, but at least A is addressing that there's emotion there rather than going to process. So it's a little bit higher up the scale toward a better answer than let's go straight to process.
So really hard to tell in this, like really very hard, because it's so very subtle. It's so very subtle because again, you have to know that acknowledging emotion trumps is better, and then so it's this very nuanced coaching scale that we have to be aware of, and this is a very a tough one, honestly, when you break it down like that.
One of the things that ICF has said is don't overthink this. How do you not overthink this is my question. Because you have all of those little nuances. You have to think in depth on what they're really trying to get you to have as the correct answer is the worst scenario. It seems hard to do that. So I honor you guys for being successful at doing that. Thank you.
Question for Monsleep, Beverly, and Brandy. Questions that you flagged and then later returned to, did you feel like going with your gut was the best decision, I guess, in that regard? Or did some questions really need time to parse, I guess, the syntax and grammar of whatever question they were asking?
For me, it wasn't necessarily the question, it was the 3 worst answers. So when we talked about, I said acknowledge was one of those threads that you'll see throughout. Addressing the emotion was a thread. And then the other one was what Dan pointed out, where I kept having to ask myself, am I making an assumption here? Am I directing the session here? I kind of had to run through a Rolodex of some of those questions, really those 3 specifically, to tease out the worst answer. Obviously, I don't know if I was correct and, I didn't see my answer key, but I think the ones that I flagged the most were the ones where I had to go back and there was sort of this multi-layer worst plus another piece of worst. Just like that example.
I do wish you could go and see which ones you got wrong. I wish that there was that feedback. That's a bummer. Because how will I ever know? Right? What damage could I potentially be causing?
There is no feedback on what you got wrong. They just said you passed with this amount.
Right.
They give you a score, yeah.
That's
Did
it.
they break it down by which? Because they used to in the old in CKA,
Yeah.
it showed you how you did in each
Wow.
area.
Pass, fail. Right? I
Wow.
got an email, you failed. And I
So
got
you
an
get
email, you
no
passed.
feedback.
No feedback. And I was like, fail, what section do I need to focus on?
Right? How will I ever know? What damage am I causing?
Right.
Right.
Sorry, you failed. Sorry, congratulations, you passed. And I didn't flag anything. I just go with whatever felt right. Just I ticked on it because the first time I took it, I almost ran out of time because I flagged, looked, and read, and went back, and it kind of got me behind the 8 ball. So the second time, I didn't flag anything. I just thought, go with what your gut tells you. You read enough stuff, you should know it by now. And I just did that. So I guess it depends on, what you feel comfortable doing. I know that you only have like 70 seconds to answer a question. So you really can't get your head about the other options, the wrong options. The right one comes like, boom, I got that. And then with the wrong answer.
Actually,
I just wish it were one of those examples, pick the right answer and it was correct and you can move on.
that really makes a great point, though, about time. To be clear, I answered all of them, but the ones that were messy, I flagged so that if I had time, I could go back and rethink and digest again with fresher eyes, in theory. But she's right. Like, I took the same approach to make sure I answered all the way through. And even, if it was a gut response, that's what I went with just to get through the whole exam. And then I used my remaining time, which I had plenty of, to go back and check my flagged ones.
Did you a question for each of the three of you? I'm thinking back to the old test, the CKA, and my vague memory of it was as you were taking it, or as I was taking it, there would be groups of questions that seemed to kind of build on each other. Like question 55, and then question 56 was kind of sort of related to it, and then 57, and then it was like, oh, that reminds me of this one back here. I could go back and fix it. Did you pick up on any patterns like that where there were groupings and themes?
And also the CPA, they told you what competency, they told you what space you were working in, like where you were. This is in regards to this. And it was also open book, but there was all that going on.
I felt like a lot of the corporate questions and the sponsor questions were all together and at the end, but none of them were alike. None of them were related to each other.
So no question could help another question out, is what you're saying.
No. And also the questions, like in the sample questions, which are similar, but I don't know how the other ladies felt. I felt like the questions were much longer. I mean, they were at least 2 paragraphs, sometimes 3 paragraphs.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking at. I mean, like this one, the next 2 or 3 are all at least 2 paragraph questions, which is a lot to read through. A whole lot to read through.
And I found myself reading and trying to not miss an important word that could change my answer. And that takes time. So I just started kind of browsing, reading quickly and picking the right answer, and like the wrong answer. Okay, I'll take that. For me, it felt a little stressful because, you have this recording light. I'm at home and you're trying to read and get done. And in the back of your mind, you're thinking, I need to pass, but I don't want to rush. But there's that clock going on in the corner. So, and none of the questions are related where it builds on to the next. It's kind of random. Well, it's not kind of, it's random. It's random. So, yeah. All I can say is it really helped just to know the information. Like it just came, you've studied so long, you just know the answer. There really isn't a word or anything like that. For me, it wasn't. It was just know the material and you'll get through it kind of thing.
And it's 81 scenarios, and it's a best or worst in both. And then it's scaled, the scoring is scaled, and we use a fancy scaling calculator to figure out what that equates to. And I don't know if you guys knew this. So if we have in all of it, so the 81 and 81 is 162. Through scaling, it means you can get 37 incorrect to get a passing score. You have to get 125 correct, and that it will equate to what is a passing score in a scaled exam. So,
except that it's like the SAT. So your pass fail test comes out and it tells you have blank, blank, blank out of 600.
yeah,
So-
no, so, but that's what, so the scale, exactly. So that's how we figured out with the scale, the way scaling, it's,
Yeah.
and it's the way they say it, it's like, and I was like 200, so it's 200 to 600, and you pass if you have 400, passing is 460. So when you input those numerics into a scaling calculator, what it spits out that we can understand, that is in a practical, useful world situation, is that if it's 162, you can miss 37 of those, or get 125 right, correct, and you will get that 460, that passing score. So,
And then
yeah.
the other question I have, since it's 81 questions, and I think I've heard that one of the questions is the ICF's definition of coaching. Is there's that one just has a single answer, and then the other 80, or is it 81 scenarios?
I didn't see that question.
There was no definition of coaching.
Oh, wow.
How the heck are they supposed to know what that we know what coaching is?
Oh, I guess that's
They
the
figured it
scenarios out to make sure you know the definition of coaching. But the question, there weren't any definition like.
No, there were scenarios.
They're all
Oh, wow.
scenarios.
Okay.
Critical thinking.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think it's you said 468 to pass. I think that's the passing 468 with 600.
460.
Oh, it's 460.
Yeah. Yeah. At least that's what they told us in the demystifying the exam meeting.
Well, then for students, coming into 101 and 102, it's not enough to just know the core competencies like verbatim. Like if you just study the numbers and then study the definitions, you're not going to get those kind of questions. They are wrapped up in these scenarios, and you have to think of them that way.
They're wrapped up in scenarios that really are, in my opinion, there were a lot of corporate coaching and sponsor and contracts. It was a lot of that. And they put it in different places, whether you were in different competencies or not, they would throw that in there. That's what it felt like to me. I'm not sure what the two of you think.
I think that's right, Beverly. And I will say, I mean, I do a lot of executive coaching, corporate coaching, and I don't necessarily, while the scenarios felt relatable to some degree, the part where I struggled with is back to the actual ethics piece, the ethics wording. So knowing what the answer is that they wanted, or the correct answer is by the ICF standard and ethical standard, versus what actually might occur in real life. And so the scenarios were, almost irrelevant of what it was. It was this idea that you have to know the ethics so that if nothing else, you can recall what the actual code of ethics is point by point, to use that as a basis for making your best and worst, choices. Because I felt like there were a lot of those kinds of questions.
Yeah,
and shameless plug, last week's CLCI was about coaching with sponsors, or CLCI Live was about coaching with sponsors, and the week before it was about the code of ethics. So you might have known a little bit of this here. So
I have a question about the timing for the questions. You mentioned that it was 90 seconds per question. How do you know how much time you're spending on each question?
You don't. And I thought it was 70. I just tried to calculate how much time you have to take the exam and how many questions there are. That's how I came up with how long.
Okay.
So I didn't spend a whole lot of time in my head about the answer, the wrong answer or the right, or read this long paragraph. Take your time reading it to make sure you get everything. You really don't have that kind of time, or you'll run out.
Okay.
So if it feels like you're really stuck, and they were saying, flag it. But if you don't have enough time at the end and you flag a whole lot, you're just out of time. So just weigh your options. I figure I'm not flagging anything. I'm just going to go through it. Rip the band-aid off.
Beverly, you mentioned you took the test twice. I'm sure there's some out there that are curious as to if there's a limited amount of times you can actually take the exam.
The first one of course, you can take whenever you qualify. The second one, you can take almost immediately, and then after that, it's every 3 months. You have to wait every 3 months. You can go ahead and sit for it.
Oh.
You have to pay.
That's certainly so you can fail it once, take it again almost immediately. If you fail it again, though, you have to wait 3 months.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they said you can take it as many times as you need to.
Yeah, they said that.
As much money as you have in your bank account.
It's $105 to retake it.
Well, the first one is there isn't of course it's free. Right, where you
it's part of the.
It's part of the fee you already paid, yeah.
And the redo and everyone after that, there's a fee.
Oh, so the redo is also complimentary or part included. That's nice. Yeah.
No, the redo. Okay, the first one, must be included somewhere.
Yeah.
So you take it, fail that one, and now you're using your debit card.
Okay.
Well, we take it back. That's not nice.
Also, just so you know, if it's a 3-hour exam, right?
I think it was 3 hours. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So it breaks down to approximately 67 seconds per answer. So 67 seconds, and that's per answer. So I said per answer. So that's for the good and for the bad. So just over a minute to think about what's the best and what's the worst. Right. And that's not thinking, really, we're reading the whole scenario and then figuring those two out. Which seems like not a lot of time, but
I've heard a lot of people, because I'm in a bunch of different groups, that they did not finish the exam. And then I've had a lot of very highly educated people say, we failed it. We have no idea why we failed it. And so you three, because you passed it and are sharing your wisdom with us, we really appreciate that. That hopefully gives everyone such an amazing leg up and recognition of what that exam really entails versus pie in the sky. It's an exam. So thank you for being here. Thank you for participating. We're so honored you came back and shared with everyone here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
And congratulations, everybody. And before we sign off, we have to do the if this is good information, if you know somebody who's taking the exam, share this with them. Let them have this inside information. Share it with whomever you think would find it relevant or interesting. Also, make sure you subscribe, like, comment, all of that good stuff, and check out Certified Life Coach Institute.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Once again, this is brought to you by Certified Life Coach Institute. We're an ICF accredited school who certifies our life coaches in 3-day online intensive courses. In addition to other podcast episodes, feel free to check us out every Tuesday at 4:00 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on YouTube or Facebook for our CLCI Lives, where we get together and discuss various topics that are centered around sharpening your skills so you can become a better certified life coach. For more information, feel free to visit us at certifiedlifecoachinstitute.com. Until next time, be well.